Hello everyone, today we talk about the early imperial Roman camp and more specifically of the Praetentura, that is the third part of the Roman camp, the one close to the Porta Decumana. That is described to us as the broader camp at this point by the De Munitionibus Castrorum, by the Pseudo-Hyginus, an author of this work is dated perhaps to the 2nd century AD, and it's very useful because it gives us literally what were the instructions for the metatores, that is to say, the military surveyors that were in charge of properly creating the camp. So giving us a very technical information and a very detailed one, the best one, as a matter of fact, we have on Roman camps, their history. That naturally differs a lot from the one, for example, that told us by Polybius, so reflecting the changes in the Roman military and operational culture, and that reflects at this point, in fact, the peak of, if you want, of that engineering civilization regarding to camps and properly the scientific interest in the same. We already made, I think, a couple of videos about, or more about, the Roman camps. This is, the follow-up to the broader introduction, in fact, to the early imperial Roman camp video that I made, and it's analyzing more in depth this section. So today we look at the Praetentura, so this third of the Roman camp. So the Praetentura was divided into along the principal axis of the camp by the Via Praetoria, the road 60 feet, Roman feet wide, that from the Praetorium led to the Porta Praetoria, right? That gave the name, as we've seen, to the same Praetentura. And along the Via Principalis, and in front of the Praetorium, on the two sides of the Via Praetoria, there were two surfaces, essentially 600 feet long, called scamni, 60 to 120 feet deep, and reserved, respectively, to the legati and the tribuni of the legions, the legiones, and the praetorian cohorts, the cohortes praetoriae. And in the same area, there were also the scholae of the first legionary cohorts, right? So this camp was projected, it's important to stress, for hosting 3 legions, plus the auxiliary complement. So here were essentially the scholae for the 3 first cohorts, right? And the scholae were essentially the meeting place where the tribuni transmitted the instructions to the centuriones. And behind these spaces, on areas of 150 per 600 feet, there were encamped 2 alae miliarii of cavalry for a total of 4,000 men, right? And Hyginus gives essentially to each cavalryman a space of 3 feet for each hemistriga. That is essentially a 30 feet wide stripe, 2 of which make a single striga. So that's where troops were housed as a single row, fundamentally, in this space, to provide adequate space to each prefect in command of an ala, right? And if in this sense, if the hemistriga was 600 feet long, right, in which we find essentially 600 divided per 3, that is 200 cavalrymen, right, all along this stripe, this surface. Every ala was considered, conventionally at least, constituted by 1,000 men, and thus it occupied 5 hemistrigae. The Praetentura hosted also the sailors' contingents that were used as engineers and pioneers for the construction and the defense of bridges and other military works. Hyginus lists 500 sailors from the Tyrrhenian fleet, the Classici Micenates, and 800 of the Adriatic fleet, the Classici Ravennates. These units were supported by 600 Moorish light cavalrymen and 800 Pannonian cavalrymen, heavy, also light cavalrymen, the so-called Veredari, with the specific task to protect them during their missions. And also in the Praetentura were housed 200 exploratores in function of their role of vanguard, fundamentally, as explorers, scouts, skirmishers, and so on. And besides the 4 alae miliarii, we have to count in this area of the camp a total of 8,000 men, that is to say 4,000 for each side of the Via Praetoria. Thus are reserved for each hemistriga, 600 feet long, 1.2 feet, that is a foot and a fifth, right? Literally in Latin, adiacta quinta parte, for each man. And every hemistriga contains thus 600 divided per 1.2, so 500 men. And as a result, we can count 8,000 divided per 500, thus 16 hemistrigae, corresponding to a space of 8 per 30, that is 240 feet, in longitudinal sense, which could be lodged on the two sides of the Via Praetoria, the 8,000 men. So in this area of the camp, there is also the hospital, the valetudinarium, from valetudo, so the health properly, the veterinary clinic for the animals, the veterinarium, and carefully distanced from the hospital, not to disturb the patients, the wounded, the sick, the fabrica, that is the workshop of the carpenters and smiths, proposed to the construction and the reparation of weaponry. Remember that the Roman army at this point also relied on statal supplies, the production of which was subcontracted to privates, but fundamentally they also produced an important amount of weaponry and essentials properly for the whole military life from within the camps. Right, this was not just a need for for the actual production. I think just in overall, but on campaign, these armies were largely self-sufficient in that sense, or at least they had a capacity, even in conditions in their straits, let's say, to still produce partly their own equipment, to repair it, and so on. It was all also an administrative cost attached to the same, because in theory, still the troops had to eventually return their own equipment and or pay for, if it was damaged or not. Some of them would also kind of literally buy weapons on their own privately. And so, and to each of these three functions is attributed a space equivalent to that occupied by 200 men. Right, so for the hospital, the veterinary clinic, and the fabrica, right, and for a total thus of 6 hemistrigae. And on a longitudinal development of the Praetentura, altogether of 720 feet in total, that correspond to the space occupied in width by the 3 legionary cohorts across the Via Sagularis, and subtracted the 120 feet of the Scamni, and the 300 occupied by the alae miliarie, and the last to 240 remain thus 60 feet that can be destined to 3 roads, the vicinariae, right? So it would be something close in etymology to the idea of our neighborhoods, fundamentally in English, each 20 feet wide. And the direction of the strigae had to be also perpendicular to the Via Praetoria, right? Because towards it have to be oriented the insignia, by the way, and also, providing this broader geometrical order to the camp itself and to the structure, the surfaces that we have just listed. So the space assigned naturally could be still varied in function of the necessities arising, that is, for example, hosting up to 1,000 men, more to the accommodation that we have described. For example, eliminating or restricting the vicinariae roads, right? Always, so thus keeping essentially the same the width of the hemistrigae, consequently. And also, naturally, we have to realize that this is just the disposition that we get from the Munitionibus Castrorum, and that no camp was necessarily literally built in the same way, right? Identically. There could be so many contingencies, even just for strategical reasons, right? Of the terrain, but also the various troops that were hosted. Also, here we're talking about the legions and the auxiliary complement. But let's say there were often in Roman campaigns a lot of other, for example, allied troops that surely commanded had on their own, but were logistically and technically assisted by the Romans, that would naturally require some degree of homogeneity, of standardization, even in that for the broader the movement of the broader army and such during such instances. So you could see something different, but this was like a standard rationalized systematization for the, let's say, standard organic that was contemplated in this case for the 3 legions, by the way, because and the complement, but that could in that sense vary for that matter, right? It could be out there a legion alone or more, I don't know, 5 legions in one single camp, etc. This depended, in fact, on the circumstances, and unfortunately we're not informed about the rest, but we can somewhat easily picture it also by analogy and understanding what the various vicissitudes, even for building a camp in certain situations, could be, right? And then we will see the other parts of the early Roman imperial camp at some point. And for now, however, stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.